Welcome to the kickoff event for the 2020 season of Lanphear Live. We're presenting live, keeping social distance, from the Chaplain B. Barnes Reading Room at the Lanphear Livery. I'm Deborah Lamb, the president of the Watch Hill Conservancy, and it's my pleasure to host this evening's program. While I'm disappointed that we cannot be together on this beautiful evening in this gorgeous and historic building, nibbling on some of Grant's tasty treats, I'm so very thankful that we can at least be together virtually. These times are so foreign and so challenging that our time together feels even more precious. I'm so happy that we can continue connecting, sharing information and ideas, even if it's virtually. Tonight we have a great presentation. It's my great pleasure to introduce to you my colleague and dear friend, Dr. Peter August. I'm sure that you all recognize him, as he's been a valuable team member, volunteering, leading, and contributing with the Conservancy at every level for nearly a decade. I'm thrilled that Dr. August could join us tonight for our 2020 season kickoff for Lanphear Live. Take it away, Pete.
Deborah, thank you so much. What a warm introduction. That was terrific. Well, good evening, everyone. It's delightful to see all those smiling faces out there in Zoom land. Thank you for taking the time to join us. We've been working very hard to prepare for this evening. Janice and her team have lined up a great group of speakers, and it's really an honor for me to kick things off. Although I'm the person at the podium tonight, the projects and the work that I'll be discussing with you this evening is really the work of a large team, and you can see them on the screen here. So I'm representing a number of people tonight, and everything I'm going to talk about is really due to their hard work. We certainly couldn't do the projects that I'm going to describe alone. We love this graphic. It's our Napatree Point logo cloud. And all the institutions that we have partnered with over the years have their logo up here. The Block Island Maritime Institute has been a great resource for us in putting together the Lanphear Live lectures. Fish and Wildlife Service on plover monitoring. The National Park Service on how to direct the flow of people without influencing the flow of sand. You're going to be hearing a lot about that tonight. And on and on. And so we have a large number of collaborating institutions. We're very appreciative for their work, and it's been a real pleasure working with them. And we have a number of groups who are paying our bills. Certainly the Watch Hill Conservancy, the Fire District, and the A.M. Roberts Foundation provides that base funding to keep naturalists on the beach, to keep our core programs running. But a lot of the projects that I'm going to talk about tonight were funded by the CRMC, the URI Coastal Institute, Rhode Island DEM, and a long list of funding agencies. And so for their support, we're grateful. And as Deborah mentioned, we have a wonderful team of science advisors who are very active in keeping Napatree the special place that it is. One alliance that we have that I think you might find interesting is with the URI Coastal Institute. The Coastal Institute is a branch of campus that was developed to be the bridge, the connect point between the academic community and our partners outside of academia, where jointly we could work together to solve real-world problems in coastal ecosystem management. One of the Coastal Institute ongoing projects is their climate response demonstration sites. And they've chosen 3 places in Rhode Island where innovative, cutting-edge stewardship is happening to maximize resilience to climate change effects. One of those sites is the working waterfront in the Port of Providence. Another one of the sites is the residential and commercial areas over in Barrington Warren. They have some big issues with storm surge. They're literally the tip of the spear when hurricanes and big storms march up Narragansett Bay. So they're doing some very interesting work, and they've chosen the Napatree Point Conservation Area as a representative of a natural site whose stewardship programs are increasing resilience to climate change impacts. And so we're very grateful for this designation by the Coastal Institute, and we're very pleased to be able to do things like this evening, share some of our climate change stewardship programs with all of you. So let's start with a little bit of history. And let's start with Adrian Block. Adrian Block was a Dutch trader. He is credited to be the first person to survey and map Long Island Sound, the Connecticut River, including the Fisher's Island and Block Island Sound. His 1614 map is the first and best map of this area. He is the person who named Napatree. When Adrian Block was moving through the area, Napatree was heavily forested, and he called it a nap of trees, nap meaning the shape of the nape of a neck. Adrian Block also named Fisher's Island after one of the crew members on his boat, and he saved the last naming project, a very special one, for himself. He named Block Island after himself. And so Adrian Block is the first Westerner to really explore this area. Let's look at an 1847 NOAA nautical chart of Little Narragansett Bay, Fisher's Island Sound. Look at the shape of Napatree. It's L-shaped, and the extension from the tip of Napatree going toward Stonington is almost as long as the part of Napatree that we're familiar with today. And one thing that we're going to discover is Napatree is forever changing. Pre-1938, Napatree was a bustling place. There was a lot happening on the island, or on the peninsula. We had 39 homes lining the dune spine in this area. Imagine what a setting that would be, with your front porch overlooking the ocean, your back porch overlooking Little Narragansett Bay. At the tip of Napatree, we had Fort Mansfield. Fort Mansfield was built in the late 1890s, and it was decommissioned in 1910 when it was found to be easily invaded. Its cannons were positioned such that boats could come close to shore, and it didn't provide the protection results that the military was looking for, so they decommissioned the site. In its heyday, there were 100 soldiers stationed at Fort Mansfield and 20 different buildings to support the facility. You can still see the cannon batteries out there today. There were 3 originally. 1 is now underwater in the ocean, and 2 are up in the headland. So this is how Napatree looked pre-Hurricane of '38, and the hurricane changed everything. Napatree was wiped clean. This aerial photograph was taken the day after the hurricane of '38, and look, not a home to be seen. It's barren sand. Here near Watch Hill, Napatree breached, and the part that went off at a right angle at the tip of Napatree also breached. This is, I think, one of the most dramatic photos I've seen of the effects of Hurricane 38. The arrow is pointing to a rock jetty here. You can see the Bathing Beach Club, all the homes lining Napatree, same jetty after the Hurricane of '38. The slate was wiped clean. Napatree is forever changing. That L-shaped extension is right here. It's Sandy Point. It's moved about a mile since the Hurricane of '38. There it is, pre-Hurricane 38, here it is now. This is kind of a time sequence of how the shape of Napatree has changed over the years. It's really a storm-driven ecosystem. Big storms come and big changes happen on Napatree. So change is part of this system. Here's how it was in 1938. Napatree is a biodiversity hotspot now, only 80 years later. And this shouts one thing to me: resilience. Napatree is a very resilient system. It started with nothing, and now it's quite a special place. And this just isn't me expressing my personal feelings about Napatree. The Audubon Society of the U.S., the National Audubon, has designated Napatree a globally important bird area in the way that it's critical habitat for migratory birds. It's home for a number of rare species. Globally, it's a very important site. Resilience. Napatree is a very resilient place. So with this little historical review, what have we learned? We've learned that Napatree is a storm-driven ecosystem. Napatree is resilient. It's always changing. The biodiversity on Napatree is incredible. And one thing that you're going to see in a few minutes is it's highly valued by the public. A quick geography of Napatree now. 86 acres, the ocean frontage is about a mile long, 500 feet wide in the widest location. Almost all of Napatree is owned by the Watch Hill Fire District, and they purchased the land in 1945 to make it available for the public good. In 2014, the Watch Hill Conservancy was granted a conservation easement over the fire district property on Napatree, and the Conservancy has the primary responsibility of stewarding Napatree now. Napatree gets a lot of love. On a hot, warm summer day, we can have 1,600 people lining the beach. And on the other side, they've counted up to 600 boats at anchor. Where else in this region can you drop your anchor, come ashore in your little rowboat or your Zodiac dinghy, walk across the dune, and enjoy probably the most pristine barrier spit ecosystem in southern New England, all for free? It's really a very, very special place. The ecology of Napatree is phenomenal. Here are the habitats that we see, and two jump out at you. This bright yellow area, which is maritime herbaceous dune. Those are the dunes the dune grass and the sand dunes. And out here in the headland, at the tip, we have maritime shrubland. These are the top rare and vulnerable and threatened habitat types in the state of Rhode Island. And Napatree is dominated by these habitat types. So it's really an important site to maintain these critical habitats. And this information is taken from the State of Rhode Island Wildlife Action Plan. You can see it on the DEM website. It's the definitive go-to place to learn about the rarity of plants, animals, and habitats. So Napatree is very important habitat-wise for us. How might climate change impact Napatree? Well, in a bunch of ways. Certainly, our rising sea levels is an obvious one. And related to that is the increase in nuisance tides with sea level rise. And I'm going to be spending a little bit of time on that theme. Climate change science tells us we're going to get more intense hurricanes. And we have already learned that Napatree is a storm-driven ecosystem. The warmer temperatures are an issue that I'll talk about in a second, and changes in what we call in ecology the phenology of the site, when seasons happen. Because Napatree is so important for migratory animals, the timing of things like horseshoe crab breeding and the arrival of our migratory shorebirds has to be in sync. Same thing with our migratory birds and insects in the fall. There are things that we can do to minimize these impacts. These are the take-home points that I hope you walk away with. Rising sea levels, what can we do about that? Well, we can't stop sea level rise, but we can make sure that we allow for the natural movement of sand on Napatree. I'll tell you why in a second. More storms, we need to make sure that we have a very dense base of plant roots and rhizomes on our dunes because they're going to be part of our recovery. Warmer temperatures are going to affect water quality. We need to avoid low dissolved oxygen. We need to be mindful of nuisance macroalgae. And so this is something that I will visit in a minute. And we've been working very hard to make sure that we have a diversity of plants on Napatree that provide value to our migratory species and our pollinators. So the charge that the Conservancy has with its easement. Number one, people are part of the ecosystem. Napatree is for the animals, Napatree is for people. We want people to be able to come to the site, to learn about the site, to enjoy its pristine beauty. They're part of the equation. We need to protect the rare species on Napatree, the piping plovers, the least terns, the oyster catchers, the osprey. Whatever we can do to enhance the ecosystem condition of Napatree is a challenge that we have. It's important for us to know if problems are coming, perhaps invasive species. We need to know about it before the problems become unmanageable. And whatever we can do to enhance resilience is a good thing. The challenges are, we love making Napatree available to people. We need to make sure that this heavy use that it gets doesn't create problems with species or habitats. We work hard to educate our visitors, to teach them a little coastal ecology, teach them some natural history of our amazing fauna and flora. And a very important part of our charge and our challenge is to create this sense of awe, of wonder, this sense of place in the next generation of Napatree stewards. And I'll talk about that at the end. So what can we do to make Napatree resilient? What are some examples of stewardship that can enhance the quality of Napatree? Back in 2012, we GPSed every trail on Napatree. We had 64 different trails totaling 2.4 miles. And as people would walk down, we call these social trails. They're kind of willy-nilly all over Napatree. As people would walk over them, they'd trample the dune grass and other vegetation. And it ended up creating about 1 3/4 acres of ruined habitat. With some very clever management that I'll show you in the next slide, we've now reduced Napatree down to 8 trails, only 0.3 miles, and only 0.2 acres trampled. And we did this with the simplest of mechanisms. The Napatree managers simply marked the trails that they wanted people to walk down with these tall yellow posts. These, you can, as you're approaching Napatree from a boat, these are very conspicuous from the water. And if you're a boater coming to Napatree, you probably want the route of least resistance in getting from the bayside to the ocean side. So I take great pleasure in watching the boats come in on Friday afternoons for a weekend to anchor. The first place that they anchor are where those big orange poles are. And so these have been very effective in marking those 8 trails that we want people to walk down. As people stop using the social trails, and we've roped them off and let people know this trail is now closed, we basically have reclaimed 1.5 acres of maritime dune, herbaceous dune habitat. And so we're gaining habitat by managing the trail systems. Very simple solution. We monitor compliance to these trails every summer. We now have 100% compliance. A lesson that we've learned many times is if you let people know what the right thing to do is, they'll do the right thing. They value the place. they respect the place, and they want to do the right thing. Very simple solution. Another issue with all the trails was, after Superstorm Sandy, we had 7 locations where the ocean overtopped the dune. And this is an example of one of them. And it pushed all this sand over on the bay side of Napatree. Every one of those overwash sites was on a well-used trail. They created a dip in the dune, and that was the first place where water could pass through. This photo was taken right after Hurricane Sandy. This is a current photo. All this tan vegetation, all this tan that you see here is dune grass habitat. You don't see a lot of dune grass following Hurricane Sandy. All the sand on the dune got pushed over to the leeward side of the dune, and it was a big sand barren. The following spring and summer, you wouldn't know anything at all happened. All this dune grass vegetation just popped right back out. It pushed up through that sand, and it was able to do that with that dense layer of roots and rhizomes underneath the sand. So, maintaining a dense layer of roots and rhizomes for ecologically important plants, that's something that we can help the ecosystem with. And so we're doing this with a number of plant restoration projects that we've run over the years. And this work has been really generously supported by the Rhode Island CRMC and their Coast and Estuary Habitat Restoration Fund. I think we've had 3 allocations of funding that's allowed us to plant 2,500 individual plants of 20 different species. This work has been led by Hope Leeson. Hope is the resident botanist for the Rhode Island Natural History Survey, and Hope is the person behind Rhody Native, a source of native vegetation that we use in our plantings. And so the whole purpose of this is to choose plants that provide benefit to pollinating insects, migratory species, and that will thrive in the otherwise pretty harsh Napatree environment. And this is what we're seeing. This is a trail that was just after it was closed off in 2015. You can see the vegetation coming back a couple of years later. Same thing, 2015, the vegetation is coming back great. And so this is a little thing that we can do to make Napatree a little bit better habitat for our pollinators. I think that you're getting the message. Napatree is a really dynamic place. Here it is right after the hurricane of '38. Here is that breach that I mentioned, where that long appendage got cut in half. And there that breach goes. It's charging north, and it's now Sandy Point. Critical habitat, bird nesting habitat, and it's almost made landfall there in Stonington. And so we see a lot of geological change on Napatree. Another area of great change is this area in here by the lagoon. Okay, notice in the sequence how that lagoon is changing shape. That's really a very dynamic part of Napatree. All of these geological changes on Napatree are being studied by Dr. Brian Oakley, Eastern Connecticut State University, and one of our Napatree science advisors. Let me draw your attention to this map of Napatree on the bottom left of your screen, and hopefully you can see this black outline that I'm following with my cursor. That is the ocean boundary in 1939. Here is the bayside boundary just above it. What this shows us is, since the hurricane of '38, all of Napatree has moved one complete dune width north into Little Narragansett Bay. It's moving north. And how does it do that? It's very simple. Here's a cross-section of Napatree in the dunes. When big storm events, when big wind events come, it pushes the sand up to the top of the dune. The sand falls on the leeward side, and it builds up on the lee of the dune. And after time, it basically moves that whole dune, in our case, northward into Narragansett Bay. For this to work, we need the sand to move so that the dunes can move. And Brian goes out, he has 4 transects on Napatree, and every 1 meter along those transects, he'll take a very detailed elevation reading with his RTK GPS unit. And this allows Brian to monitor the changes in the shoreline and the dune dimensions on Napatree over time. Why do we care about this? Brian started this right after Hurricane Sandy, and it's Brian's study that is providing us really important information on how long it takes the Napatree system to recover itself after big storm events. So the key message here is we need sand to move. The traditional way of telling people where they should and shouldn't go in dune systems is to use dune fencing. That's been kind of the classic fencing method. Dune fences trap sand. If we want sand to flow up and over the dunes so the dunes can migrate during storms, this will prevent that. If you've been on Napatree recently, you'll notice that we're replacing the dune fencing with this cedar split rail fencing, which is a beautiful guide for people to let them know the most appropriate path to get from point A to point B, but sand can move through the split rail fencing. And so this has been a management trick that we've used to help promote the flow and movement of sand on Napatree, and to do so in a very effective way with the split rail fencing, which, if you ask me, is very warm and welcoming, especially now. It's turning silver gray as it weathers. It's a terrific addition to our Napatree management. We learned about the split rail fencing from our colleagues who manage national parks, coastal national parks in the Northeast, Fire Island, Gateway, and Cape Cod National Seashore, and they were having the same problems with dune fencing catching sand, impeding dune dynamics, and they found split rail to be their most effective mechanism. And so with wonderful grant support from CRMC and the Coastal Institute, we've been able to put a lot of that in. We spend a lot of our time on Napatree monitoring our various species, and our conservation easement requires that we keep tabs on our federally listed species like piping plovers, like American oyster catchers. We're very attentive to monitoring the abundance of horseshoe crabs. When the horseshoe crabs come ashore this time of year in big numbers to lay their eggs, this is a core part of the Napatree ecosystem. All those eggs are highly nutritional food for our migratory shorebirds passing over Napatree. This gentleman is Mr. Ray Larson. Ray is an ornithologist. He started monitoring the birds of Napatree in 1963. He continues to this day. He goes out to Napatree a couple of times a month, and all of his observations get posted to the Cornell University eBird database, so it's part of the public record. And his sightings on Napatree have been a real management resource for us. This is Grant Simmons. Grant Simmons has been heading up the water quality monitoring in Little Narragansett Bay and off the ocean side of Napatree for over 13 years. And all of Grant's water quality measurements go to the Watershed Watch program at URI, where it's part of the whole Rhode Island database. Napatree is critically important to know something about water quality. A lot of the animals that live on Napatree depend on marine organisms to get by, the osprey and the terns feeding on the bait fish and the larger fish. And so the condition of our marine systems on either side of Napatree is important to us. A little factoid, you can consider Napatree the end of the pipe in terms of water quality coming down the Pawcatuck River. And the Pawcatuck River drains 1/3 the whole state of Rhode Island. The Wood River and the Pawcatuck River come together, forming the Pawcatuck. So 1/3 of Rhode Island drains into Little Narragansett Bay. And so it's critical for us to keep tabs on it. It's especially important now because the town of Westerly, the state of Connecticut DEP, Rhode Island DEM, are working very hard to deal with stormwater management issues in the area and to upgrade the wastewater treatment facilities to keep our water quality good. The data that we collect and the data that our partners collect don't stay with us. Every year we publish our State of Napatree report. It's available on the Watch Hill Conservancy Napatree Resources website. Grab a copy. It'll tell you everything that you ever wanted to know about Napatree and then some. And so we work hard to make all these various studies and observations and monitoring programs available to all of you all of the time. But the data don't stay in-house. At the end of Napatree, we have a short antenna that monitors seabirds as they fly by. That's a project of U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. Our horseshoe crab surveys all go to Sacred Heart University, who maintain a big database of horseshoe crabs in Connecticut and Rhode Island. As I mentioned, our water quality data go to Watershed Watch. We've been doing bat surveys for the last few years. Our bat data go to DEM, and we've discovered that bats at night are using Napatree the same way the birds are in the fall migration. They're hugging the coastline as our migratory bats head to Georgia, the Carolinas, and Florida. And so the amount of bat activity in September, October is quite amazing. We would never know that were it not for the bat surveys. I told you about Ray Larson's important surveys. U.S. Fish and Wildlife and the Napatree naturalist staff keep very close tabs on our plovers, and we've been doing camera trap monitoring to get a sense for what the rest of the Napatree fauna is like, and we've provided those data to U.S. Fish and Wildlife. Another interesting climate change impact that we're now having to deal with because, and let me play this tape back, people are part of the Napatree ecosystem. We want people to be able to get on Napatree. We want people to learn things on Napatree. We want Napatree to be available to them. This is the Napatree entrance. There's only two ways to get on Napatree. You walk down this path if you're walking in from Watch Hill, or if you're coming in off your boat, you'll cross over one of those 7 trails. This is the entrance at our average high tide. Okay, so when you see 0.0 mean high or high water, this is the average high tide over an 18-year period. Okay, plenty of room to get by. But when we get extra high tides due to lunar effects, storm events, that sort of thing, our entrance shrinks. Here is the Napatree entrance when we get 0.7 feet above mean high or high water. Well, if we need to get an emergency response vehicle out, if somebody's having a medical issue on Napatree, we can't do it over dry land now. And when we have tides that hit 1.24 or greater feet above mean high or high water, if you're going out on Napatree, you're waiting because there is no dry access. These are called nuisance tides, and nuisance tides are happening more and more frequently now. And look at this graph. Nuisance tide levels, and this is a NOAA study. Nuisance tides are any tide greater than 1.6 feet above mean high water. Look at this change in the increasing frequency. The units here are days per year of nuisance tides. And if you study this map right here, the blue areas show the magnitude of nuisance tides. How deep does it get? And we are in the highest magnitude nuisance tide part of the United States, okay? So nuisance tides are a big deal for us. If we look forward, here is a graph of the projected increases in nuisance tides for all of us, everywhere, in the face of climate change. These different colors represent different climate change scenarios. Whenever you look at the climate change predictions, there's always a high, a medium, a low, a high. And each one of these colors represents the increase in frequency of nuisance tides. In almost every scenario, what happens a couple of days per year will be happening every day per year. So our nuisance tides are going to be our new normal. This is an issue. We're working on trying to understand the solutions that we have to keep the entrance of Napatree above our nuisance tide levels. That's a work in progress. It's a high priority for us because, once again, it's important for us to make sure that Napatree is publicly available. It's a special place and we want people out there to enjoy it. Finally, I think the most important activity that the Conservancy does in terms of stewardship, forward-facing for the future, is educating our youth. The Conservancy has a fantastic program called the Napatree Investigators, where two very accomplished educators will work with the kids 3 days a week and teach them lessons in marine ecology, stewardship, conservation. And it's through programs like this where that sense of love, that sense of place that we have will be passed along to the next generation of stewards. This happy young man 20 years from now is going to be hopefully very committed to stewarding Napatree. We also have student groups come out. We have faculty research projects. So Napatree plays a very big role education-wise.
I think we will end our discussion right there. We have a super engaged audience. Thank you very much. We can't wait. You know, if we stay this engaged, we'll bring you back. We know where to find you. Thank you so much, Peter, for just a beautiful presentation
and Deborah,
for us.
thank you for the work that you and the Conservancy does to support all this great work on Napatree. It's important and we appreciate it.
We have a terrific board, a terrific group of leaders, and wonderful members. So thank you all for being with us.